What if I told you most men don't lose their marriage because their wife stopped loving them? They lose it because of what they do after divorce becomes a real possibility. In this video, I'm going to walk you through the 5 most common mistakes men make when divorce becomes real, and more importantly, I'm going to show you what to do instead to help you avoid doing damage you won't be able to undo later. If your marriage or relationship is unstable right now, pay very close attention to this entire video because this phase is often where reconciliation either quietly becomes possible or permanently impossible depending on how you show up. Before we jump in, if you appreciate me making videos like this, let me know by going ahead and giving the like button a gentle tap. So I want to establish something important in terms of context regarding these mistakes and how most men totally misread these situations. There's this common notion that because their wife has started mentioning divorce as a possibility, whether it's being hinted at or bluntly discussed, men think their wife no longer loves them. Can that be a possibility? Yeah, it can be. However, the majority of the time she hasn't lost love for you, but the marriage is no longer operating in the same emotional reality that it used to. Your wife is not asking herself, how do we fix this? She's just gotten to the point where she's asking herself, is this relationship still emotionally safe, viable, and worth staying in? That distinction matters a lot because when you start to sense the foundation of your relationship shifting underneath you, your default reaction is usually to start over-functioning and problem-solving, thinking that she doesn't love you anymore, so you have to start proving or convincing her to see how much you love her, with that goal in mind of smoothing things out in the relationship because that's what you feel she's missing from it. But what happens when you do this is the mode of proving communicates the exact opposite of what she needs to feel in order to reconsider and go down a reconciliation path. And this is where the first mistake shows up. Mistake number 1, trying to convince her she's wrong. Like I just mentioned, when divorce becomes a real possibility, you don't want to become the common man who goes right into panic and persuasion mode. Trying to convince her that she is wrong will not help you reconcile and bring the relationship back to a happy and forward-moving entity. But the common mistake is men start explaining why divorce doesn't make sense for the family. They start reminding her of the kids, if they have them, their history of the relationship and how much love was there, and all of the good years and good times they had. They also list the changes they're willing to make, which isn't a bad thing and is something you must do in order to get where you want to go. And I'm not poking fun or making you feel guilty if you have done this, because I've done the same thing as well. But what you have to understand is even though all things you are saying are from a well-intended place and sound very reasonable, because of the phase of the relationship, and most importantly, the phase of what her emotions are in, these things communicate to her that you don't trust her emotional experience and she has to see things your way. The hidden psychological mistake here is that the moment you start trying to persuade her, you position yourself as someone who needs her agreement in order to feel okay. As much as telling her how great you can be and convincing her to give you another chance by telling her how much you care about her feels like the right thing to do, what it really does is comes off as something that you need to happen for you to be okay in your identity. And that starts to erode her respect. Not only that, it confirms to her nervous system the very dynamic that likely led to her starting to pull away in the first place. What also makes this especially dangerous and also easy to go down this road is that every explanation you are giving or argument you're presenting feels justified and rational. And to be honest, they probably are, and they sound extremely logical. The fact is, persuasion does not create sound emotional safety. And to take it a step further, it actually creates more resistance on her end. So what do you have to do instead to curb mistake number 1? You have to go from your goal of persuasion to the goal of emotional steadiness. That does not mean just because you stop trying to persuade her that you are agreeing with the divorce. What this does is very powerful. If you can shift to emotional steadiness, it means you stop trying to argue or persuade her out of her own emotional experience. You're acknowledging what's real for her without trying to control her emotions and the outcome. She is not going to reconsider divorce because of really sound logic, but you can start driving her to reconsider it naturally because she's going to start to experience a change in the emotional dynamic. You will never be able to ignite this positive emotional experience for her while you're trying to win an argument. It can't be done. That is absolutely fool's gold. That leads us to mistake number 2. Once convincing doesn't work, many men swing to the opposite extreme, overcorrecting and overperforming. So what would it look like if you were making the mistake of overcorrecting or overperforming? Well, you start to become hyper attentive and over apologize, and you basically are trying to be the perfect husband. You start to clean up more around the house. You start to focus on forcing communication more, and becoming endlessly accommodating. I know this is not coming from a bad place, and yes, helping out around the house and having better communication are great things to have to keep a marriage strong. But being endlessly accommodating is not a good thing to have, even in a strong marriage, but that's a topic for another day. But when she's disconnected emotionally, doing these things send a very dangerous signal. They come off as trying to win her approval back, and what that does is put her in the position of emotional authority over you. Now, think about it. If she's already feeling uncertain, overwhelmed, and disconnected emotionally, and now because of all this overcorrecting and overperforming you are doing, she now has the weight of the emotional authority in the relationship. And that starts to become even more exhausting to her, not reassuring. There has to be polarity in the relationship, and you as the man have to create emotional safety by being the emotional leader. The more you try and prove your worth, the less solid you appear, and the more you try to earn safety, the less safe you feel for her. That is the paradox that so many men struggle with when they're trying to save their marriages or long-term relationships. I don't want you to be one of those men who struggle as well. So here is what you have to do in order to avoid mistake number 2. You have to return to baseline stability. This means you show up consistently, not in a performing way just to get what you want. You have to be respectful without self-erasure, and you have to make changes because they're aligned with your values, not because you're afraid of losing her and that is your only motivation. When your behavior stops feeling like a reaction to her mood, the emotional pressure in the overall relationship dynamic drops. If you're able to start relieving that pressure off her shoulders, this is one of the few conditions where a reevaluation of everything can occur naturally for her. That brings us to mistake number 3, which is one of the quietest but most destructive mistakes men make. Mistake 3 is when you collapse your position just to keep the peace. This is where you stop expressing your own perspective entirely. You think it might just be easier to avoid difficult truths, suppress resentment, or completely swallow boundaries and let all of them go and not enforce any of them. You can't abandon your needs and boundaries because you're afraid that asserting them is going to push her further away. If you try this, it will make you disappear inside the relationship, and there is a huge cost that comes with that. When you abandon your internal center to preserve the relationship loses the very thing that once made it feel alive. Again, this does not help you become safer to her. You actually just become invisible, and that does nothing to inspire reconnection. So here's what you have to do to counteract making mistake number 3. You have to practice calm self-anchoring. That means you don't escalate arguments, you don't withdraw completely, and you don't self-abandon. You have to stay present while presenting true emotional groundedness and honesty. And there is one very important ingredient while you do all of the above. You have to maintain that presence without demanding or expecting anything in return. This is what emotional leadership looks like in real time, and it is incredibly rare. That brings us to mistake number 4, turning the situation into a negotiation. At this stage, many men unconsciously treat divorce like it's a contract dispute. And I get that in many times it could be, but if you're trying to start negotiating timelines and proposing trial periods for things to get better, or asking for guarantees like if I show up like this, promise you won't leave. Don't make that mistake of thinking that negotiating the structure will create safety for her. You are emotionally communicating that your need to negotiate her back is covered in fear. It communicates that you need certainty right now because you can't tolerate any uncertainty. It also comes off as, well, I'm only going to try to improve myself if you can guarantee that you'll stay with me and acknowledge me doing it. See, again, this is the outcome dependency I'm talking about. The reality is uncertainty is exactly where growth happens. When you try to push for clarity before the emotional conditions are ready, you force premature decisions on her end that say, yep, this guy has no idea and I am out. Reconciliations that last are not going to be because of a deal you struck with her. They're going to happen because the emotional dynamics soften over time. So to avoid mistake number 4, here's what you need. You have to create emotional space without disengagement. That means you don't rush decisions, you don't force conversations, and you don't try and lock any outcomes. You have to develop your ability to lead in the relationship and allow time and consistency to do their work. And that requires self-regulation. And finally, mistake number 5, making divorce the center of the relationship. Look, I get it. When divorce becomes a real possibility, it is very easy to let it dominate every interaction you have with her, and most men fall into that trap. Every conversation you have circles back to it. Every silence between you two is interpreted through divorce, and every moment can become charged with this lingering cloud of possible divorce. This unintentionally makes divorce the emotional centerpiece of the relationship. The problem is what you focus on expands. There's a lot of people who've laid claim to that quote, Oprah being one of them, but is it incredibly true? And I've experienced this as well. When divorce becomes the main theme, all the actions you take are going to be out of fear of losing everything because you're focusing on the possible divorce, and that's only going to expand the probability of it happening. Doing this crowds the conditions that are required for reconnection. So to avoid mistake number 5, you have to shift your emotional center away from divorce and back towards self-respect, presence, and stability. This does not mean you have to ignore divorce or pretend that it's not happening as a possibility. It means you stop organizing your entire emotional life around the threat of divorce. As challenging as it may be, you have to reorganize how you show up in a more positive way. That alone often starts to create a noticeable shift in how your presence feels around her. Now, I want to connect these 5 mistakes directly to the question that's probably sitting in the back of your mind. How does this actually help save my marriage? Reconciliation happens because she starts to feel a change in the environment, not because you convince her. If done right, she's going to feel less pressure from you. She's going to feel less emotional volatility from you. She's going to feel more steadiness and more self-respect coming from you. This combination starts to create something extremely powerful and ultimately what you want, reconsideration on her end. It's not going to happen overnight. It's not an Uber Eats order that's going to show up on demand, but it will happen organically. This is why chasing certainty and trying to strike a logical deal with her almost always backfires, and why calm consistently, quietly works. So to review and to make sure this is drilled home for you, if divorce is being discussed, your job is not to argue it away, perform your way out of it, collapse your standards to keep it, negotiate prematurely, or obsess over the outcome. Your job is to regulate yourself, stabilize your behavior, maintain your internal center, reduce emotional pressure, and lead without force. That is the path that preserves dignity and very high possibility towards reconciliation. If you're watching this and divorce is being talked about in your marriage right now, I want you to hear this clearly. You're not out of options, but you are at a turning point. What you do in this phase matters more than what you say. So if you want a clear, structured understanding of how to navigate this without making things worse, I put together a free masterclass that walks you through the framework I use with men in your exact position. It is the fastest and most direct path to restoring emotional leadership, self-respect, and stability, because those are the conditions where reconciliation becomes probable. You can find the link below in the description. Don't sit on the fence when you can be taking action and starting to turn everything around very quickly. And no matter what happens next, remember this: leading yourself well is never going to be a mistake, even when the outcome feels uncertain. If this video helped you out, give the like button a tap and subscribe to the channel as well. I'll see you in the next video.